Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. I'm glad you're here. Verse 25, Luke's Gospel, chapter 10. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Now that question, if we said it now, we would say, what do I have to do to be saved? What do I have to do to go to heaven? Or what is written in the law, he replied, how do you read it? He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied, do this, and you will live. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead, that is, between life and death. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So, to a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, it's approximately the wages a man would make in 2 days, and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Now, the first idea has been said so many times, in so many ways, it's been misdefined and misused, that it's almost become a trite expression. That is, something which has lost its meaning from overuse. But I'm going to say it anyway, because even though it's been used and misused, it is at the heart of what the gospel about Jesus is all about. Our faith, the Christian faith, can be described with one word, and that word is love. Love. The expert in the law came to Jesus and said, what do I have to do to go to heaven? What do I have to do to be saved? Now, he was an expert in the law, meaning that he was a scribe. He copied the law over and over again, making the scrolls that were used in the synagogues of his day. They counted every word and every letter, so that they could count the words after they copied a passage, even the letters, and know if they made a mistake or not, because if the word count came out wrong, they either put too many words in or didn't put enough words in. And as you counted the words and got to be an expert on copying, you came to know the law better than anybody else. This man, this expert, could quote large passages of what we call the Old Testament by heart with no trouble at all. So our Lord said, what do you say? How do you read it? Now, they would look at the law and ponder it and pull meaning out. They would read it. It's like 2 doctors talking to each other, looking at an MRI or X-ray and saying, what do you see here? How do you read this? What's your interpretation? So here we have 2 experts in the law, Jesus and this man. So how do you read this? Now, what the expert said was not mind-blowing. This was the heart of Judaism. This is what they taught. So the man was simply saying what was already being taught. He took a passage from Deuteronomy chapter 6 and a passage from Leviticus chapter 19, and he stitched them together, and he made what we call the Great Commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your passion, your desires, with all your soul, the spiritual part of you, with all of your physicality, your physical strength. That is everything you own and are and have, including your money, yes, you Baptists out there. And then also with your mind, the way you think, the way you reason. So this teaching is that you love God with everything you are. Have you ever heard of the hokey pokey? Put your left foot in, left foot in. The man who wrote the hokey pokey had a heart attack. They put him in the ambulance to get his left leg in, and then things went really crazy. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Well, you know how the hokey pokey ends, right? Put your whole self in, put your whole self out, put your whole self in, and forgive me, we're not going to shake it all about. And so what Jesus is teaching, what the Old Testament teaches, what this expert in the law knew to be the truth was that you love God with everything you are, everything. Then the second is like it. The expert said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, we talked about this a few weeks ago. Throughout Luke's Gospel, throughout the New Testament, throughout the Bible, we have the vertical and the horizontal. Even the Ten Commandments is the vertical and the horizontal. That we love God and we love other people. And if you remember, our church has based our entire purpose on the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. We love God with all we are, and we express that in worship. And we love each other, we love ourselves, we express that in our small group ministries that come together for Bible study, but especially to care for each other in small groups. And remember, we added to that the Great Commission. We go into the world, so we're serving the world with the gospel. All of us want to be working someplace in the kingdom's work. But Jesus said to the man, now you've answered correctly. But the expert wanted to justify himself, maybe vindicate himself, that is, to prove himself right and his behavior. Now listen. Hearing the Word from the Gospels and the Word of Jesus, knowing the Word as the expert did, and doing the Word are two different things. And so he knew what the Old Testament said, that we should love our neighbors, love ourselves, but he had a very hard time doing it. And so what he had done was, and this was a problem in that day, and it's a problem now. Doesn't matter what culture you go to, no matter what country you're in, it's the same thing that happens because of our sinful natures. What he did was he drew the circle of neighborness as small as he could. I love my neighbor, other Jews who are like me racially, who are like me in my religion. I love them, but I don't love anybody else. In fact, they're my enemies. I hate them. So who's my neighbor? He thought that Jesus would say, oh, well, you know, you're Jewish friends. But he wanted to prove himself right. So we know what we should be doing. We cannot do it. It's impossible because of our sinful nature. Now, every Saturday morning I do the same thing. I get out of bed. I take off the bedclothes. I put them in the washing machine. I wash them. Do it every Saturday morning. I also cook. I also clean. I also hug my wife once in a while and tell her I love her. I know I'm a catch. So I wash the bedclothes every Saturday morning. And Deb, we just got some new sheets for QVC. Debbie said, listen, up in the top of the closet, you can put them on the bed. I said, well, hold it. There's a lawn service company in our area that the commercial is, we grow, we don't mow. Have you heard the commercials? On the radio, on TV, I see absolutely no. Okay, you see, no, we grow, we don't mow. So he said, put the sheets on the bed, Ernie. And I said, Debbie, listen, I grow, I don't mow. Well, anyway, she understood right away what I was talking about. She understood that I was washing, but I wasn't putting the clothes on the bed. Now, it wasn't because I didn't want to do it. I'm just very, very bad at it. I put the fitted sheet on. I put one corner on, then I put the other corner on at the foot, and then one at the top pops off. And then I put 3 of the 4 corners on, and I put the 4th corner on, and the other 3 pop off. Ah! I have trouble putting the pillows in the pillowcases. I can't get them to go in. And I put them in, they're all lumpy and don't look right. I even have trouble with the top sheet, making it look neat and straight. But I looked up in the closet after she left to go to the choir retreat. I looked up in the closet. I saw them sitting there. I said, listen, I'm 49 years old. I'm a grown-up man. I can do this. And so I put the fitted sheet on. I had a dickens of a time getting on. Then I put the top sheet on. Then I pulled up the blanket and the comforter. And as I put the comforter on, I noticed that the sheet on the left and the right was about 8 inches too long. And I turned it around in my mind, and I realized I'd put the top sheet on sideways. I had to completely unmake the bed and turn the sheet around. Somebody this morning was leaving and said, Ernie, I found something. I bought a sleep number bed, and what I do, I put the head up and the foot up, and I put the sheet on and lower it down. I said, okay, I understand now. I got to buy a $4,000 mattress in order to get the sheet on correctly. Yeah. Well, anyway, I fixed it, and I looked up at the clock on the wall. It took me 15 minutes to make the bed. I think my philosophy of grow and don't mow, I think that's a good philosophy, don't you? Well, you see, I wanted to do it. I wanted to. But I was unable to. And you know, you may want to do what the law says. You may want to love God. You may want, especially here, to love your neighbor. In fact, theoretically, it's possible to keep the law perfectly because Jesus did it and be in right relationship with God. But because of our sinfulness, we'll never be able to do it. We may have the desire, the want to. We can't do it. This man wouldn't accept that. He wanted the circle to be drawn as smallest as possible because he wanted to be vindicated in front of Jesus. I'm going to go to heaven even though I hate 9/10 of the world. But you see, love is the word that describes our faith. Love of God and love of each other. For God did not send the Son into the world to condemn the world. No, that's my job. Yeah, it's my job. God sent me in the world to condemn the world. No, He did not. Now, Jesus goes through a parable, teaches a parable, to teach that the circle of love should be as big as possible. There's a man going on a journey. He's traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho. It's only 17 miles, but the elevation changes going down by 4,300 feet. It's a pretty steep trip. And along the way, there are gullies and ravines and crevasses, brush and places where criminals could hide. And so going down from Jerusalem to Jericho was a very dangerous trip. And they knew this. They were relating when he was talking. Being robbed by some highwayman was quite common. So the man's traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho. He's robbed. They take everything he's got, even his clothes. They beat him and leave him closer to death than being alive. Now, a priest comes along. Now, the Jewish people believed in the cootie theory of unrighteousness. You know, remember cooties, don't you? Remember cooties? Ernie's got cooties, cootie guns, cootie magnets. So when you're in third and fourth grade, you're using the cootie gun to put it on people, got a cootie magnet, pull it off of people. You touch somebody's got cooties, you get cooties too. Well, the cootie theory of unrighteousness is that if you touch a person's unclean, you become unclean too. Could be a leper, you get his cooties. You couldn't touch a dead man. You would get his cooties. So the priest is walking along. He's going to a temple to serve. He sees a man who's there is dead. If he touches that dead man and tries to help him, he's going to become unrighteous. When he got back to the temple, he had to go through a very long ritualistic process of cleansing and washing to make himself able to serve in the temple. He didn't want to go through that kind of hassle. So your neighbor was the person closest to you, so he got as far away from the man as possible so he couldn't be described as his neighbor. The priest is like the senior pastor of a church, you see. That kind of religious figure. Then there are Levites coming along. They look and see this man. Now, Levites, this Levite, individual man, they are the priestly tribe, and they serve in the temple doing practical duties. They clean, they feed, they cut the grass, you know, they do mow. They're kind of like staff members, worship pastor, deacon. They care for practical needs. And he didn't want to get the man's cooties either because he had to go through ritualistic washing. So he travels on the side of the road as well. But then along comes a Samaritan. Jesus is drawing the strongest possible contrast, the strongest possible one. If he was telling us the way a Jew would want it to be told, the man who was beaten and robbed was a Samaritan, and the Jew condescends, lowers himself, to touch the Samaritan. But instead, it's the Samaritan looking out for this man. Samaritans were thought to be the worst and most vile people by the Jewish people on the face of the earth. Even worse than Gentiles and Romans. And in the Jewish hierarchy, there were Jews, there were Gentiles and Romans, there were Samaritans, and there were household appliances. That was the way it went. And the reason was that the Babylonians conquered the Jewish nation in 621 BC and took everybody who was able off into slavery in Babylon. They left behind the dim-witted, the half-witted, the weak, people who weren't desirable. And then these Jewish people were left behind, intermarried with the Canaanite people, and became, as far as the Jews were concerned, a half-breed race. And then they combined their religion, the Jewish religion, with Canaanite religion, and they had a heretical faith as well. They had their own temple in Mount Gerizim, their own way of doing things. And so the Jew thought that in every way, because they were half-breeds, in every way because of the heretical religion, in every way, they were the least desirable people on the face of the earth. And you know that Jesus had problems with Samaritans. He went into a Samaritan village and threw him out. James and John said, let's bring down fire from heaven on this village to destroy them. Jesus said, no, you don't understand anything I've taught you so far. But even though they threw him out, he loved the Samaritan people. Went into the town of Sychar, met a woman by a well, led her to faith in him. She brought out the entire town. And he and the disciples ministered to this entire Samaritan village because our Lord understood what it meant to love your neighbor. And so he tells this parable. He's telling a parable, a story about the most dramatic thing possible. A Samaritan who took care of a Jew, who clothed him, who took his money and paid for his room in the hotel, who poured wine and oil, sounds like a salad dressing, doesn't it, on the man's wounds and to bind them and take care of them. Went back and looked out to see if he was okay a few weeks later. This Samaritan did everything he could because he understood what it was to be a neighbor, what it is to love people. The center of his religion was love. Now, when I was a teenager, I went to civil rights rallies and tried to, be part of the movement at the time. And then later on, when I was in seminary, I was living in Fort Worth, Texas, and I worked for a company called Homeco, which it came to my mind years later they were probably pretty sleazy. But I would go door to door for Homeco, and I would ask if they had any home improvement they wanted to do. For example, garage conversions. We used to do this. We used to take our garages and turn them into rooms. So we did this, and I would say, you need a garage conversion. You have a problem with your roof. You have some trim on your house needs to be repaired. And so I would get minimum wage plus $10 a lead. Salesman would go back and follow up on the lead. Well, I was assigned to work the African-American neighborhoods of Fort Worth, Texas, and I, over a 4-year period of time, I knocked on every other door. I had a guy working with me. That's why I didn't knock on every door. Okay, in every African-American neighborhood in Fort Worth, Texas. And we did white neighborhoods as well. When I went to a white neighborhood, people, they weren't very friendly. They didn't want me to come in and talk to them. They didn't want anything. They knew I was a salesperson. They didn't want me there. But in the African-American neighborhoods, everybody, every door I knocked on, they asked me to come in. Every single one. And it took forever to get anything done. And I got lemonade and Coca-Colas and cookies and all kinds of snacks and goodies. And I would sit down in a chair, look up on the wall, and there would be a picture of John F. Kennedy, because he was responsible for civil rights legislation. And then there'd be a picture of Martin Luther King, because he was the leader of the movement. And there'd be a picture of Jesus. Every home I went in. And here's what I found out, which should not be a shock, okay? But I was in my 20s. I was naive. What I found out is that everybody is exactly alike. Do you hear this? A few weeks ago, I talked about the life of Christ has never been lived. What he taught has never been lived. And I can't solve all the problems of the past and all the injustices that have been done and all the wrong things that have happened, although I'm very sorry about them. But there's one thing I can do. One thing you can do is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. See, that everybody is exactly the same. Now, racial animosity is not an American problem. It's a human problem. If you go to Ireland, the Catholics hate the Protestants, the Protestants hate the Catholics, if I can talk. You go to Spain, the Basque hate the Spanish, and the Spanish hate the Basque. The Catalonians hate the Basque, and they hate the Spanish too, and back and forth, back all around the big triangle. I don't care where you go. If you go to Germany, people in Berlin hate those in Vienna, and Vienna hate those in Berlin. Isn't it strange? And you know why? Because we are sinners. That's why. So Jesus told a story that made the greatest possible contrast about a man that this expert of the law would hate, but acted as a neighbor and loved somebody he probably shouldn't have loved. So, Jesus always brings it home. Which one was a neighbor to this man? And the expert in the law couldn't bring himself to say the Samaritan. He said instead, the one. His teeth are gritted together. Have you ever had to say you were wrong and sorry and you didn't want to? Maybe I'm the only one. I don't know. Who was the neighbor? The one who was good to him and took care of him. Couldn't say Samaritan. Now, I want you to hear the last idea. This is what Jesus said. Go and do the same. Now, that was a challenge. You love people. You look out for people. You care for people. You do for them what I would do for them. Wherever you go, whoever you come in contact with, you love them. That is the heart of our faith. That's what we're about. Yes, love God. But in some ways, it's easier to love God who you cannot see than it is to love your neighbor who you can see. In fact, based on other teachings in Scripture that Jesus made, I think that if you don't love your neighbor, don't love people around you, then you can never really love God because you haven't really changed. Now, a few weeks ago, we had a hurricane come through. Florence. Remember Florence? And I've lived here all my life, except for the time I was in seminary. I've seen hurricanes come and go. And in fact, if I told you that my dad took me out in the yard to see the eye of Hurricane Hazel pass over our house. We haven't had a Cat 5 hurricane hit the east coast of the United States probably since the great colonial hurricane, which I think was in 1648. You weren't here then, okay? You weren't here. Yes, and hurricanes have been around for a very long time, and they're not getting stronger. Probably the strongest storm that ever hit us was the Great Colonial Hurricane. And we also had a hurricane come through in the 1800s that deposited Willoughby Spit. If you don't know what Willoughby Spit is, it's a long piece of land that goes out. And what have we done on Willoughby Spit? We have built houses on it. What the Lord has given, the Lord can take away. Thank you very much for understanding. So anyway, I have a lot of friends who are freaking out. Hurricane Florence is coming. They went to the grocery store, the Walmart, pushed the cart down the low. They go like this. All the water was gone. All the Lunchables were gone. The peanut butter was gone. The stores were empty. We picked them clean because we were terrified of Hurricane Florence. And by the way, it was a destructive hurricane, not from winds primarily, but from the great amount of rain that it dropped. But we've had hurricanes come and go. Happened many times. We're still here. There's no reason to get afraid. I'm just leading up to something. You know when the hurricanes come in, they draw the cone of uncertainty? Now, every time I hear that, I know you're not going to understand this, but when I was growing up, Get Smart was on television, and there was the cone of silence. You see, I'm the only one laughing because I'm the only one who remembers. So the cone of uncertainty, I can't help but think of the cone of silence. I'm entertaining myself, I guess. But the cone of uncertainty, they draw this cone showing the northernmost possibility the hurricane can go and the southernmost possibility they can go to kind of give you early warning. At the very head of the cone is a large circle, which is the projected path of the hurricane. So when you see that, the hurricane's coming through, it's going to wreck destruction along the cone of uncertainty where the great circle is. Now, I want you to hear this. I want you to draw the biggest possible circle around yourself, and I want you to be a hurricane of love. Go and do likewise. Everywhere you go, everybody you touch, everybody you see, everybody you meet, everybody you know, you encourage them, you build them up, you take care of a need that they might have, you give them some money if they need it, you just love them. When they see you coming, they don't know whether to be afraid or be happy because they know you're going to hug them. You go and you do likewise.